Have you ever received advice on how to approach another person, maybe your partner, taking into account lots of information that you've perhaps learned about personal development, and then had this uneasy feeling that perhaps there was something about that made you less assertive in the situation, perhaps in standing up for yourself or in some other way? Hey everyone, I'm Sonia. Welcome to my channel where I give you tips and strategies to help you have your most fulfilling life and relationships. And if you're interested in getting on my mailing list for more tips and strategies and receiving a free PDF with some more guidance as well, go ahead and check that out in the description box below. So today I wanted to talk about this sort of uneasy feeling that we can sometimes get when we are going to take a new tack and change up our interaction with someone. This is often a partner, but not always. And we're trying to use things we've learned, let's say, about what their attachment style is, what our attachment style is. That's what I talk about the most because I have particular training in attachment style healing. But it could be in some other way as well. It just could be something else, a pain point that you've learned about the other person that you're wanting to be mindful of, just having learned about how to word your communication better, using I statements, whatever it is. Sometimes then you've got the strategy, but you might have this uneasy feeling that going to do this, to change it up so much, working so hard at this, sort of trying to be so mindful of the other person, that somehow that can sometimes feel like, well, does this mean I'm somehow just not being assertive? Almost like, shouldn't I just say what I've learned, spell it out there, that kind of thing. Really there is a distinction there. And I'm going to cover that in a minute. Before I do, I want to mention how this can look different for different people. So often, let's say someone is an anxious preoccupied attachment style and or a people pleaser style, generally. So for that person, I think it's pretty easy to see how if they've been learning that about themselves, maybe they've been trying not to be a people pleaser, they might feel like, well, is this just doing that again? So the flavor for those people might be that, is that just me doing that again? And now I'm people pleasing in the way that I'm doing the changing things up. You can sort of see how that could look that way, right? Because they're being mindful of the other person again. And so for another person, let's say the person is a fearful avoidant attachment style. And really, it can look different ways even within these individual styles, especially maybe for fearful avoidant, because they have both the dismissive tendencies and the anxious tendencies, plus their own flavors. But one way it might look for a fearful avoidant person is that they could be afraid of sort of the burden that it's creating for themselves, mostly emotionally probably, but perhaps even just in terms of time and commitment. So they might become concerned that they're always going to be the one who has to do this. They might start to feel a sense of burden ahead of time or overwhelm. So that could be something that concerns a fearful avoidant person. And for a dismissive avoidant person, this could just really rub them the wrong way with their typical way of thinking that, well, each person's responsible for themselves, sort of with the implication of, well, so I can just say my part, right? And can't they just independently handle what I say and then handle themselves and say what they need to say, right? So those tendencies towards the dismissive avoidance can crop up as an area of unease or resistance when attempting to make some of these changes potentially. So those are just some different flavors, many more out there I'm sure as well, for how it might look, this sort of uneasiness that I'm talking about, or this like, is this really like the right way to go when we do go into an interaction trying to be extremely mindful and careful with our speech. So my argument to you in this video is that it is different. So our own self-advocacy, our own assertiveness is a different issue than how we interact in a particular given situation in terms of being mindful of the other person and particular and strategic about how we communicate. And I have three points to make about this. So the first point is that the real goal of it, right, is the goal of trying to change up the communication is to just make it go better for both of you. So the goal is the assertive part is that you have something that you're wanting to change or wanting to communicate. And really, this methodology of how you're doing it is in order to make it go as well as possible. And so it really should be making both of you feel better, right? So not just the other person. It should not be that you're eggshelling and you're feeling bad and the other person's, only the one who's, getting their needs met within that, even that particular interaction. Instead, it's that this particular methodology is helping you both feel better and making the goal of the whole interaction actually happen more likely and in a better way. And I think a secondary point to this, this topic, the subtopic, is that it's interlinked, right? It's not, and I mean, you wouldn't want the other person to feel bad, hopefully, right? If you've done your work and you're thinking about it, it's not in order to somehow guilt them, or if there's something else like that going on, you got to take another look at your goals. In any case, so it's just interlinked. The fact that they're going to feel better because you are approaching it in this way, and the fact that they're going to feel better, but also the whole thing's going to go better, which hopefully will make you feel better as well. It's just interlinked in terms of how that whole system of the change and how you're interacting is going to go. And then that leads into a really related point, which is that it's not really about when exactly it's going to happen. So this comes into play often when someone is being really strategic about the timing of when they talk to someone. So if they're being mindful of the other person's mood, if they're being mindful of something else that's just been going on with the other person, or even if you're being mindful of your own self and you're not regulated, or you need to wait before you talk about something. Again, it's really being strategic, right? It's automatically going to include that the other person, it'll go better for the other person and they'll feel better if you say don't approach them about something really big if it's a terrible time for them, or if you don't approach them with something like that in the heat of the moment, if you need more time to regulate. So it's going to make them feel better, yes. And so it is you being mindful of it, but it's going to go better for you too. And the actual, what's trying to be communicated and or changed is going to go better as well. And then, so my third point about this is that what's really most important is the follow-up, the follow-through, having check-ins, that it isn't just that one time. It's the important thing to keep in mind. So it's not really only just about this one communication. It's also about the follow through. And even with that, of course, we are taking into account the fact that change takes time to take hold. And yes, that can mean you being kind with your partner about it, like doing gentle reminders, and being very understanding if there's backsliding, or if, depending on the topic, if it's something that would have backsliding of a pattern or a habit. But knowing that that's true for you too, right? So always remembering this is also true for you yourself as well. And I said there were 3 sort of topics, but that sort of leads into a 4th, which is that, of course, you deserve all of that as well too. So yes, you may be the one who has happened to do the most work and are like the one changing up the communication system. And we can't necessarily expect the other person to be as interested in personal development or to be at that same stage of everything. But that doesn't mean that there aren't going to still be expectations of them as well, particularly in how they communicate with you and how they treat you, that it's respectful and all of that. So there still can be boundaries around that. There still can be asks done, right? Whether at that point or in the future. And so finally, I just wanted to address each of those 3 kinds of flavors it could look like. And again, that's just 3 possible flavors. But I want you to see how for each of those different people who are uneasy who are uneasy with being the one to make this careful communication, I just want you to see how I would encourage each of them to take as sort of the main nugget for them to help ease their particular concern. So for the AP person, for the person who is anxious, preoccupied, and or a people pleaser, you can notice, right? You can notice if it's starting to slip into patterns of people pleasing. So you can tell yourself ahead of time, hey, this isn't about people pleasing. This is about me having discovered the most strategic form of communication, the best way of, making this happen with everyone, with everyone being as happy as possible. And so you can just tell yourself, hey, if I notice myself slipping into people pleasing, if I notice myself actually going away from the main point, the main topic of what I want to do, if I had a very specific thing I was asking for and now I'm watering it down as I'm going across, you can know that that's a separate thing that you can take into account and make sure is going on in the particular situation. And for both the APs and for the fearful avoidants who might be concerned about burden or overwhelm, you can ask the other person very specific things. You can ask them for very specific things like, hey, could you handle the weekly check-ins, and making sure, it's just an example, but making sure that those happen. Can you be the one to do that? And so both for someone who feels like they want to make sure they're not people pleasing and for someone who's concerned about the burden, you just ask for specific things that the other person can contribute, even if they're not the one instigating the change or super into personal development and all this kind of change. And then finally, for the dismissive avoidant, probably the most useful thing there for a dismissive avoidant to tell themselves is to remember, hey, yeah, it is true. It is true that we're also just philosophically responsible for ourselves and that they are independently responsible for themselves. That's true. But remembering the goal part, the practical part. And so often for DAs, remembering the practicality that, hey, I'm like really trying to make this happen here, and I am working with another person, and just understanding the practicality of that can be the most helpful thing for why it makes sense and the big pros towards using this changed communication and actually being mindful of the other person. So really, overall, for all those people and for other situations as well where the person's uneasy, remembering that unease, is your self-talk. That doesn't mean it's not important though. So try to identify what that self-talk is. What are you saying that concerns you about it? And then how can you address it? Is it just more of a philosophical thing you need to address, like with DAs, where you're like, hey, this is practical though, and this needs to happen to make it work out best? Or is it something that you want to be mindful of, like with the AP person who might be concerned about slipping into people pleasing? So whatever that is, know that the self-talk itself is not how it's going to go and doesn't mean that it's the wrong thing to do, but it might give you some more information about how you can go forward more confidently in doing these kinds of changes, and know that you still are being assertive and self-advocating.